Hello, it's me, John Solano. If you don't know who I am, please check out some of my other videos. But I've been a professional counselor for 33 years. And of course, I've accumulated a lot of, I guess you could say, knowledge and experience that over the years, many of my clients have asked me to share. And so creating a YouTube channel was probably the best way to do that. Because I want to help folks out as much as possible in understanding their lives and what's going on in the world. So I'll keep it short today. As you know, often go quite lengthy, and that is because I do want you to have a breadth of information. I don't think it's always helpful to just get little pieces and kind of not have the full understanding of things. I think that's some of the issues that we're dealing with in a society as we do today. But I did want to address today something what I call words matter. And that's really, it doesn't carry the magnitude that I would like it to, the weight that I would like it to, that particular title. But words do matter. One of the things that I teach when I'm doing my classes or speaking at a conference or whatever is that there are different levels of the mind. And there's a certain level of the mind that I call carries sacred language. We might call them like power words, words like integrity, honor, duty. Those words carry power and they carry weight, and they're connected to more of the sacred things in life. And so whenever we are standing on sacred ground or we want to address sacred things of depth, we we have to be really careful. And that's one of the things that I'm noticing right now, and especially over the last decade, and especially over the last 5 years. Unfortunately, as demonstrated by our leadership in North America, we're seeing a significant disrespect for a variety of words, if you will. And it's unfortunate because I've been a family counselor for over 12 years, in addition to the other couple of decades that I've been a counselor. And I know our children are watching us. Our young adults and our children are watching the adults and the leaders to kind of figure out how to be in the world in a good way. And when we have our leaders who are disrespecting words, and don't understand, because any mature person understands the power of words. If you're a studier, if you will, a student of uh, mythology, transpersonal psychology, or spiritual disciplines like myself, you can think about the Christian take on, in the beginning there was the word. Words carry power. Absolutely, we know that, right? um, and so I want to just nail here. I was going to say a couple of words, but maybe a few people. Maybe this is a message for our leaders out there and for other people who, for instance, using the word racism. As you know, racism, the word racism and other words are being thrown around left, right, and center. Racism and all the words that I'm going to be talking about are powerful because they have attached to them a significant history, oftentimes a significant history of pain and suffering and even death. And of course, that's why we want to eliminate racism, if you will, or address it within our society, because it has to do with hate. It has to do with pain and suffering that people are experiencing. And it also has to do with the people who endured this and persevered and even became victorious in the midst of it. It carries weight. Now, I was going to address this later, but I'll address it now. Words like this, because they deal with pain and suffering and even death, are existential in nature. It's, in other words, they deal with life and death matters. And life and death immediately brings us upon sacred ground. And whenever we're on sacred ground, we need to treat that ground with reverence and respect. And we're not seeing reverence and respect right now in our leaders regarding these words. We're not seeing reverence and respect and humility, especially when it comes to the adults who are using these words. Instead of every time somebody just throws a word out there like this, or anytime something happens and somebody's just called a racist, it cheapens, it cheapens the, and it's a sign or showing of disrespect to the history that's behind this, the people again who have gone through incredible pain, suffering, you know, attached to this. And we all know this, it begins to cheapen the experience. It begins to cheapen what the word means. But here we live in a society where people are throwing this around. Little kids are throwing this around in schools, and we can't have that, because it's too serious of a matter. It's just too existential in nature. Now, I want to say, connected to this word racism, there's discrimination. Now, I made another video on this, and that was addressing discrimination from a human developmental kind of lens. And that basically was letting everybody know that as human beings, we have to be discriminatory. We're born to discriminate. We have our five senses. What do you think those help us do, amongst many things? But it helps us discriminate. You can smell one thing that's different from another. You can see colors and other things in depth, and it just helps us to discriminate, to see things. We have to be discriminatory. We all are, by biology, by nature, by culture. That is not automatically it is not automatically racist, because racism has to do with hate. There's nothing hateful about being discriminatory. And there's nothing you can do about it as a human being, because you are right now, even as you're listening to this video, or even as you're watching other videos, you're going through your day and your life discriminating. What are you going to eat today? What are you going to have with, with that meal? What, are you going to warm it up or eat it cold? I mean, you're discriminating left, right, and center. What are you going to wear today? You're discriminating. There's nothing wrong with that. If you couldn't discriminate, you probably wouldn't be alive, because you would have gotten hit by a car, or, Lord knows what else. You wouldn't have lived beyond 5 years of age. So another word, misogyny. Oh my gosh, same thing. This is a word that indicates hate. Because one person or another, or in this case, someone expresses an opinion that may be different than what a female may have, doesn't make the person a misogynist, because it has to do with hate. Now, we've got, this isn't always easy to figure out. I mean, we've got the ability to have free speech in this country, and there's some limits around that when we talk about hate speech. And I'm no professor on the the freedom of speech legislation or the Constitution, but we know the difference between when somebody's just speaking their mind and somebody speaks hatefully. Again, it has to do with hate, has to do with pain, suffering. It's a word that we should not be using very often, and it should be used only under really significant circumstances, and as I mentioned before, with reverence, respect, and humility. Another word, Nazi. When I first heard this being used, and I think I was most significantly, as a part of our public discourse, was in the United States during the Trump campaign, when Democrats were describing President Trump as a Nazi. Ever since that time, the word's been thrown around, and it's deeply painful, if you will. It saddens me to hear that, because I'm old enough to remember the horrors of the Holocaust. And unfortunately, those horrors, if you will, and the Holocaust is not being remembered well by our youth. But to remember the Holocaust and to remember the war, the thousands, tens of thousands of lives lost in World War I and II, we know what Nazism is, and it certainly isn't what we're seeing today. And when this word gets used by the immature, as it has been, it is incredibly disrespectful and dishonorable. Same thing with the word coup and the word insurrection. That's being thrown around. And now anybody, as you can see, most recently, anybody who wants to speak their mind or support a particular cause is called an insurrectionist. And because people want to gather and speak their mind and do it civilly and peacefully, they're accused of launching a coup, wanting to take over the government. That is so immature. One of the other things, and I say immature, I say that from a developmental perspective. It's not like I'm just saying somebody's, oh, you're being childish. No, it means you're psychologically delayed. There is certainly something wrong with a person's psyche when they're using these kinds of words in this way and have entitled themselves to such an indulgence. That is a sign of absolute immaturity, delayed development. Other words that I shake my head. It's like you hear oftentimes in the political discourse, people being referred to as progressive or elite. Really? Like anybody who wants to be referred to in that way has to be experiencing some narcissism. Why on earth would any mature person want to be called an elite or progressive? Maturity is about knowing your shortcomings. Maturity is about knowing that nobody's perfect. No matter how much money you have, how intelligent you are, you're never going to be all that. When we refer to elite, that's a reference to classism. It's a reference to a caste system. That is one of the most undemocratic, un-American, if you will, unfree world references you can make. And yet, watch the news, whether it's the right or left, throwing that word around. And let me just say that as I listen to the folks on the right refer to the people on the left as elites, I think to myself, what is wrong with you? Like, do you not know psychology? Why would you want to reinforce the using of such a word? And if you're being called that, I would be offended. It's like the lack of humility that implies with that title is just deeply, deeply wrong, a sign of significant narcissism, a sign of immaturity, and again, delayed psychological development. As I mentioned earlier, many of these words, if not all, are powerful and not always in good ways. As we've seen, somebody can be called a racist and all of a sudden their life is ruined, their career is ruined. Somebody gets called a Nazi and their career is ruined. Somebody gets called an insurrectionist and they're arrested and held without bail. These are powerful words. One of the things that we should have all learned as part of growing up, as part of the discipline that we would have experienced, hopefully from our parents and our communities, is that words like these are reserved for those who are wise and mature. As I mentioned, because these are words that are existential in nature, they immediately place us on sacred ground. They're like handling explosives. should only be done by a, if you will, professional, somebody experienced, somebody mature enough, somebody who can respect what they're handling. You know, when you're working with something explosive, or when you're working with something powerful, you don't have a loud voice. You work very slowly and very methodical. You're quiet. That's why things sacred, we speak to those often in a whisper. And we don't say a lot, and we don't say them in large crowds, and you only speak of the sacred amongst those who understand the sacred. We should have adults in our world who, when they, or let's say, who would teach this, and when they would hear someone of immaturity speaking in this way, they would experience discipline. I'm not saying punishment, but be informed and be restrained from saying those words. They have no authority in the matter, no right for those words to come out of their mouth. You see, that's one of the things that we've lost, is that in this age of entitlement that we live in, entitlement and indulgence, we have, you know, lost some moral containment, where we used to know that, hey, that's just not a line you cross. But that line has been systematically disassembled or ignored, or you know, pushed aside. And here we have it, and we're all paying a price, whether you're directly involved or not. When you hear these words being mentioned by those who have no wisdom and no authority to do so, our hearts sink, because something is terribly wrong. Something got missed in how we're raising, how we were raised, what we experienced in our society, and how we've been raising our own kids. So I'll leave this one there. And if you're listening to this video, it's very likely that you're already a person of some wisdom and maturity, and very likely you're not engaged in this. But as you engage others, and maybe your own children, you can remind them of the sanctity of these words, the weight that they carry. And only those who are most mature and wise really have the authority to wield them. All right, take care. Thanks for tuning in.